Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome once again. This is a conversation with His Excellency, the President of Afghanistan, Mohammed Ashraf Ghani, in partnership with the World Economic Forum and CNBC News. My name is Hadley Gamble, and I am the Senior International Anchor and Correspondent for CNBC. Welcome to all of you, and welcome, Your Excellency. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
I want to kick off by asking you where we stand today when it comes to the situation of security in Afghanistan. At the end of last year, there was a lot of conversation, a lot of grumblings about the decision on the part of the Americans to start drawing down troops. Where are we in your opinion?
Well, I think we should put it in perspective not of last year, but of 5 years. 5 years ago, there were around 140,000 international troops in Afghanistan, 100,000 of them Americans. Over 100,000 American troops withdrew, and also correspondingly a number of others. And all the predictions were of gloom and doom, we will collapse. We didn't. The Afghan security forces have emerged to a significant force. Our commandos are second to none in the region. Our air force has tripled. Our commando and special forces have doubled. We've taken 8 districts back from the Taliban. Daesh, for the first time in eastern Afghanistan, 1,000 of them surrendered. What a 20-ton bomb could not do, a popular mobilization of 2,400 community members did. Security is a problem. No one can say that it is not, but the direction is the right direction. And prior to the election, 65% of the Afghan people think that the direction is the positive direction. Withdrawal, the resolute support mission is an instrument. The key issue is the bilateral security agreement between the United States and Afghanistan and the status of forces agreement between Afghanistan and NATO. The numbers can adjust, increase or decrease. A decrease at this moment will have no material impact on our capacity and our willingness to ensure moving forward.
The American president has said on multiple occasions that he wants to bring troops away from the region, not just Afghanistan, but Iraq and elsewhere as well, of course. That hasn't necessarily been what's happened over the last year, as you know, with continuing violence in the Persian Gulf. We put more troops back into the region. When you sit back and think about this within a 10-year horizon, do you anticipate we're going to see a time with a full withdrawal of U.S. troops?
Of course. I deal with uncertainty. Uncertainty is the norm. So the type of leadership that is required of us is to be able to cope with uncertainty. That means multiple scenarios, multiple options. A single course of action is just not feasible. To see complete American withdrawal of troops from the region requires the region to get its act together and agree on the rules of the game. The region is pre-Westphalian. A lot of states simultaneously deal with non-state actors as instrument of destabilization. And as long as you have that, then the space for wider things opens. The other question is, what's the threat of terrorism? Is it a technique that is applied, or is it a fundamental challenge, the way fascism was? Depending on your answer, then you get very different set of alignments. Because the question from an American perspective is, where does Afghanistan fit? And the answer is homeland security. If it's viewed from homeland security, then it's one set of partnerships. If it's in terms of the region, it's another. What is important, and I hope the communique that I issued has made it clear, we have a commitment from the United States and from NATO that no force stationed in Afghanistan in any way, it's largely non-military because it's advise, train, and assist, will be used against any other power in the region. So our hope is for the region to settle and to be able to arrive at security arrangements so the threat to the rest of the world that currently is posed by the region diminishes or is eliminated.
When you think about the United States as a partner regionally. There's been a lot of conversation about that the U.S. has turned a new page under U.S. President Donald Trump, that in some ways, with the idea that they would be withdrawing from not just Afghanistan but elsewhere, that the U.S. is leaving the region behind.
Well, I have no problems dealing with President Trump. I'm one of the few leaders that has an excellent relationship, including today's conversation. Because I frame my relationship in terms of priorities that he's promised the American people, and he's consistent on that. The question is, how do we find common ground? And where is common ground to be able to move forward? His style is disruptive, meaning that when the status quo reaches a point where it does not produce the results that he wants, he engages in disruptive change. And this is a type of change that we need to increasingly understand. We have destructive change on the economy, which the professor has made a lifetime explaining to us. We now have the same sorts of things. So it's either creative change that we can manage together, destructive change, like the waves of Schumpeter, or disruptive change. We need to understand that this is not isolated, it's part of a pattern. And at times, the status quo for certain gets disrupted. What the second, third order, and fourth order consequences of that, or we need to be able to work together.
Is the negotiating with the Taliban the best option or the only option?
Negotiation is a means. The desire of the Afghan people, and don't forget, please, I run on a peace ticket twice, and peace has been my goal, is to see the end of violence. The billion-dollar question is, are the Taliban ready to see the end of violence? If they are, Afghan society is willing to reintegrate them. But if they see peace as a Trojan horse to overthrow the government and the society, then the society and the government would mobilize. And here, let me make just a simple observation. Our security is not the responsibility of the United States, it's our own responsibility. We need to be able to secure our future. No country, and besides, for thousands of years, we've provided for our own security. These 18 years are an exception. Afghan society has seen 40 years of violence. We have to see the end of violence. And now it depends very much on the Taliban. And there are certain questions. Top of it, gender. No Afghan woman, as long as I'm alive and in a position of responsibility, is going to be subjected to gender apartheid. Our ambassadors to the United Nations and the United States both are Afghan women. They're second to none to anybody, and they thrive. The generation of young Afghan women see the world as their potential stage, youth. 70% of the society is under 25. They are not going to be caged. The issue is society's changed. Are the Taliban sufficiently aware to engage in this? Their power is negative, meaning it derives from violence, from suicide bombing, from violence against, but it's a negative power that is recognized by our society. And therefore, we want to see an end to it. For that, we have to find a political solution. All wars must end politically. These are not wars, particularly the wars of the late 20th century or 21st century, that can end in the classic way. So we need to engage. The good news is that the rank and file of the Taliban are sick and tired of fighting. The people who are sitting in Doha are getting their fourth or fifth wife and are enjoying themselves. They've become investors. The other is, this is one of the largest drug running operations in the world. Heroin and now amphetamine. So those parts need to be asked about the entire community. Will they be an asset or will they be a reliability? It's an answer that we have to find together.
What kind of timeline are we talking about when it comes to securing Afghan for the Afghans?
I think in the next 4 years, in the last 5 years, we showed that we can rebuild resilience, that abandonment is not in our vocabulary. And speaking on behalf of my fellow citizens, which I have the privilege of serving, the United States and the rest of the world does not owe us. You came to help us in the moment when our resilience was really finished, 5 years of drought, gender apartheid, dictatorship, war, etc. Now it's really up to us, because Afghanistan is not poor. It's rich. And we need to develop that richness for the sake of the people. First, just let's take the environment. 220,000 megawatts potential of solar, 80,000 wind. Geothermal looks good. Natural gas is beginning to really look good, second best, but nonetheless. We're connecting our location. For 200 years in a disadvantage, now it's becoming gold. Every year, Central Asia and South Asia cannot coordinate without us. Natural gas, electricity, fiber optics, etc. So in this environment, the key becomes the human capital. We need to be able to shape the generation in our discourse, to be able to take responsibility. And as part of that, we have to accept that 40 years of violence has taken a toll. We need to accept each other in multiple ways. The past, unfortunately, is very much alive in Afghanistan. We need to put an end to this past, step back. Our golden age of Islam was unbelievable. The forgotten enlightenment. Avicenna in Abu Rayhan Biruni, 1,000 years ago, we're talking about high advanced mathematics and astronomy and others. So there's a civilizational legacy. There's a way of imagining the future, and particularly our mineral wealth that is really quite considerable should not become a curse for our people. If the curse of the plenty has to be avoided, we've created the rules, the regulations, the institutional mechanism that this can now be put at the service of the people. With that, I think we can stand on our feet.
When you think about the challenges ahead, and no doubt there are many, it's not the security that you're as concerned with as the idea, as we were discussing off camera, that the environment and what's happening with climate change could really be the greatest threat to Afghanistan's growth potential.
Not just Afghanistan, it's globally, but particularly to South Asia. On World Bank's estimate, we're talking by 2050 of 40 million refugees. Environmental refugees. With UN, the figure goes as much as 100 million. Look at what 1 degree of warming can do to India or Pakistan. We should not be in denial. I think that for South Asia and Central Asia, environmental cooperation is what could become as important a platform as Community of Steel and Coal was for Europe. The environment doesn't recognize boundaries. The Himalayas, it's our common heritage. How are we managing this? We're not. The cycles of floods and drought. The cycles of drought in Afghanistan used to be 30 years and 100 years of major drought. Now it's been reduced to as few as 5. In this environment, we, fortunately, control most of the fresh water. We provide fresh water to every single one of our neighbors. That is more important in 10 years than their oil. How do we coordinate? There's a lot here, and particularly with renewables. Given our immense potential in renewables, this could be a game changer for the region.
When you think about what happens next with regards to the investment case for Afghanistan, One Belt, One Road seemingly has left Afghanistan off their train of growth. What is coming next?
Well, first, we've created what's called the Lapis Lazuli corridor. Now we are connected through Turkmenistan to Azerbaijan and Georgia. Baku is replacing Karachi for us. And Batumi are going to be major ports of transit. Iran, if it's still exempt from sanctions, the Chabahar port, it cuts the distance by 1,000 kilometers westward. India, we're connected by air. Equally, Kazakhstan. Opening of Uzbekistan has been an immense blessing. So I really thank my brother, the president of Uzbekistan. It used to take us 3 months to get the train to China. Now it takes 1 week. The cost is coming down very radically. We had a product that seized the imagination of the Afghan people, pine nuts. 3 years ago, we didn't know we were one of the largest producers of pine nuts. Now we signed the deal for $2 billion with China on pine nuts. It used to be smuggled. There's an agricultural revolution underway focused on value chains that is really changing. Women's engagement in this, youths. The region is connecting. Asia, the only parallel to me is 1869, when the Pacific and the Atlantic railways were joined to create the continental economy and the Suez Canal was opened. Asia is transforming from a concept to a continental economy. In this, we're finding our place because without us, South Asia and Central Asia would not connect. You know, going through the mountains is not going to create that Pakistan and China. The key, the easiest way is Afghanistan and Central Asia connecting all of Asia. This is a global phenomenon. How we simultaneously bring the atavistic thinking of being bound by my national interest, right or wrong, is the challenge. We need to think regionally and we have to think globally.
When you think about what happens next with regards to the United States as a potential investment partner, frankly, in the region, that kind of economic diplomacy, a lot of raised eyebrows, frankly, in Washington at the growing relationship between Russia and Afghanistan, and the idea that they're going to continue their economic diplomacy like we've seen in Saudi Arabia, for example, and elsewhere in the region, in Iran. With regards to your government, what's your message to the United States about your growing relationship with Russia? Because it has made
a growing relationship with Russia. That's a misperception. Russia has made no investment. We wish they would.
But you're very much open to it. It's something you've been working on personally.
What I'm saying is the source of the investment doesn't matter to me. It's the quality of the investment. I want to avoid the curse of natural resources. That's my top priority. So it has to be bound by rule of law. It has to be transparent. It has to be accountable. And it has to give. Russians have not made an investment in Afghanistan, so that's a misperception. Afghanistan, in terms of the future of the electric car, could play a very significant role. We have one of the largest unexplored lithium deposits of the world. We are described as the Saudi Arabia of lithium. And then 14 out of the 17 rare earth material exist in Afghanistan, both in quality and quantity. That makes it very important. This is the new economy. How we connect to the new economy and what type of partnerships we put. Then there's the old sector. Gas is beginning to really look good for the first time. From one well, we are talking about trillions of cubic meters, not billions. Iron, it's the largest unexplored and developed mine in the world. Copper, again, the prices. We're good on the commodity cycle because 5 years ago, copper was down. They were not interested. But key is now generational power and the infrastructure that would underwrite this. But more than the physical infrastructure is the human infrastructure. So we connect to the world, but on terms that secure mutual interest. Export of capital a la 19th century Britain is to be avoided. There are lessons from that. Ask Argentina and other countries.
When you think about the relationship with the United States in particular, obviously you have a good relationship, as you said, with President Trump. You're one of the few leaders who said that you have no problems with that relationship.
No.
There was a recent report in the Washington Post. It was a trove of documents that were released, and they were talking about how for years the United States was sort of putting one over on the American public in terms of the progress that was being made. Do you think, in retrospect, that it was a question about less about fulfilling the mission and more about having a realistic goal of what success should look like?
Well, when I was finance minister, I warned about that, and I offered alternatives. Foreign aid is broken. It's not just in Afghanistan. I wrote a book on it, Fixing Failed States. So I warned, and I'm warning, and again, we have a global expert sitting here. I was not part of the system. I've worked pro bono since 2001, when I returned. I've never consulted for an American company or for a contractor or others. We warned very clearly as finance minister of a country. I stood in an international conference and said, one possible future is a narco-mafia state. They didn't pay attention. The curse of Afghanistan was Iraq. The minute Iraq invasion took place, the standard disappeared from Afghanistan. because everybody then was saying, you know, compared to Iraq, it's doing well. But that's not good enough. The other part is nobody was prepared for a phenomenon like Afghanistan or a phenomenon like Iraq. The skills that made the Marshall Plan possible do not exist within the government structures. And the capability to think through outside the box did not. So money has never been a cure. Systems are a cure. Processes, and particularly empowerment. 40% of the Afghan population still lives below poverty. Not one dam was finished. I've done more with less continuously because of prioritizing. And also, lazy habits were brought, and an Afghan elite was spawned that it was interested in rent seeking. And when you have rent seekers, you're not going to get development or democracy.
Are you finding it challenging at this point, given the fact that you're in a bit of a runoff, let us say, with Dr. Abdullah, to we have call it the lame duck scenario in the United States? Does this make your job more difficult?
I have never had a feeling of lame duck because any job I've held, I've performed to the last minute. So what did I do last week? I saw all the citizens of Kabul, district by district. We have 22 districts to prioritize the city's development. I'm legally the president of Afghanistan. I have the responsibility to serve the people of Afghanistan. The day I'm not, I'll be a private citizen and be delighted to go finish my 6 books from manuscripts. Those who have a feeling of lame duck, I think, do not have a feeling of proper responsibility. The responsibility of a president doesn't end with an election. It ends with transfer of authority. And to the day that you're responsible, you must. I've seen all 34 provincial governors. I've rehauled a number of sectors in this period. And I've engaged from President Trump to other leaders to be able to secure our interests. I've gone in the last 5 years 89 times to the provinces because the allegation was that the president of Afghanistan is mayor of Kabul. We go everywhere. You have to take a certain risk. And the election results are taking long because I want to make sure that every stone is turned and the transparency is there so we can move forward.
Your predecessor, as well as Dr. Abdullah, have been very critical of your feelings when it comes to negotiating with the Taliban and forcing a ceasefire agreement. What's your response to them?
Sour grapes. Did President Karzai achieve a ceasefire? I did. Did President Karzai offer an unconditional offer to the Taliban? I did. Who is approving in the public opinion polls that they would trust the peace process to? Me. I'm engaged with my people. I run on a platform and I have a program. What is the program of President Karzai and Dr. Abdullah? Please show me one piece of paper that either of the gentlemen have produced regarding the future of Afghanistan. The Taliban went to their homes in 2001. For 3 years, there was security. What actions did the president take with his entourage and appointments to produce an insurgency? He has to answer the people of Afghanistan. I did not produce this war. I served for 2 years as Minister of Finance. I didn't agree on reforms. I went to do the most honorable job, which was the chancellorship of Kabul University, and I loved it. It's the best job I've ever had. Then, I ran, and I helped. Look at my conduct. I ran against President Karzai in 2009. I offered him help with the security transition. That's patriotism. When your country needs you, you have to offer and strengthen the system. Criticism for the sake of criticism doesn't do well. And we need to engage. There's a place for him.
Do you believe he's enabling the Taliban at this point?
No, I don't want to accuse. Look, I have not said one negative word about either Dr. Abdullah or President Karzai during the entire election or the last 5 years. The conduct is, politics to me in the Weberian sense is a vocation. It's a calling. Let the people judge. And if the people of Afghanistan don't elect me, fine, I'll go become a citizen again. Power corrupts. And Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Therefore, checks and balances and citizen accountability is a must. Without an engaged citizen, you don't have a state. In Afghanistan now, the citizens of Afghanistan have all PhDs in politics. The last 40 years have immuned us to slogans. They don't want empty slogans, they want service. And you know, everybody who comes to the presidential compounds, I shake hands with them. A lot of them I embrace the men. Because I'm their servant. And they understand that there's a sense of service. That's the dynamic that has to change, not a sense that we're born. We're not born to anything. We're born to serve, if we take a calling. If not, and the feeling of superiority and this claim that power must be theirs because at some moment of history they played a minor role, that has to go.
We're getting short on time, but I just want to ask you before I let you go. When it comes to the maximum pressure campaign on Iran and what we've seen over the last several months, you mentioned commodities, prices going up. We've been following the oil story, of course, quite closely on CNBC. When you think about what happens next, how challenging is it for you to encourage international investors to get involved in Afghanistan and developing its resources when you have a region that continues to be in turmoil as a result of the policies of the United States?
Well, it's both policies of the United States and policies of Iran. Iranian revolution got a second renewal after the invasion of Iraq. Iran before that was the equivalent of building socialism in one country, what Stalin was forced to. So it opened up a second wave of revolution was renewed. It's in the region. Now, there's a diametrically two opposed sets. One is that the high-ranking Iranian officials repeatedly have said that the US must leave the region. The second is that the United States government is saying that wave has to be rolled back. So within this, now the possibility of a new Cold War looms quite large. Whether it become hot in certain spots, of course, like the Cold War. In the region, we had this in the 1960s with Yemen, when Gamal Abdel Nasser engaged against Saudi Arabia and other interlocutors, Iran, etc. It's important to think through again the fundamental organizational principles of the region. The region has been unstable in terms of rules since World War II. And what diplomacy is required and imagination is required to put an end to that vicious circle. And in this episode, there might be that opportunity, as some people who are very thoughtful think that the set of relationships to allow for predictability rather than constant disruption is there. And I hope that that would be the case.
Do you believe that the death of Qasem Soleimani made the region safer?
No one can give you an answer to that. No, all I'm saying is a disruptive set of actions took place that disrupted the status quo. The status quo was not one of predictability, but within the Cold War, in terms of the Cold War between powers, it had levels of predictability. The parameters have changed. I don't judge the consequences. Now, because that's a moral judgment one way or other. And Afghanistan wants to be a platform for cooperation. It's not our business to get engaged in further conflicts or further destabilization. But the environment within which you operate changes, and you have to take account of that change. And there are two ways of responding. One is you put your head in the sand and say change is not place, the context is not changed. The other is to very quickly assess and say, and you might get it wrong, but at least you're trying to adjust to this. And as the president of Afghanistan, it's my responsibility to navigate our interests. And those cannot be done without thinking through the region.
Do you like the president's style then? Disruption?
I'm not a judge. I'm not into likes or dislikes. I'm into partnership. And the United States is a foundational partner for us. Iran is a very important neighbor to us. How do we make sure that we navigate this relationship is the critical challenge of leadership.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining
Thank you.
us. Thank you so much.